So you may be wondering why I chose to devote a whole video to a single scene, whereas in the past videos, although we've mostly moved along in a more or less chronological order, we've jumped around a lot. Well, to me, this scene, Act 4, Scene 3, had always felt out of place. I remember the first time I read Julius Caesar in sophomore year of high school, and even then I was kind of baffled by it. Caesar has just been killed, Brutus and Cassius have fled the city, everyone's assembling armies and gearing up for war, and then we have this whole scene, about 200 lines, that's basically a schoolyard name-calling fight between Brutus and Cassius, which is immediately followed by their making up. And it always just seemed to me like at that point in the play, where the action should start picking up and heading towards the final battle, this scene was out of place and sort of stalled the play's momentum. So in the process of making these videos, I almost passed over the scene. But then I thought, why not take a closer look at it and do a whole video about it? And if nothing else, I can explain why I still think it's out of place. But having really narrowed in on that scene and tried to figure out what it was doing, I did pick up some interesting things. So basically what's going on here is that Cassius shows up and is angry at Brutus because Brutus refused to pardon a friend of his who had been caught taking bribes. And Cassius says, "That you have wronged me doth appear in this. You have condemned and noted Lucius Pella for taking bribes here of the Sardians, wherein my letters, praying on his side, because I knew the man, were slighted off." Brutus, on his side, is angry that he asked Cassius for money for his troops and Cassius refused. Listen to his complaint. "You have done that you should be sorry for. There is no terror, Cassius, in your threats. For I am armed so strong in honesty that they pass by me as the idle wind, which I respect not. I did send to you for certain sums of gold which you denied me, for I can raise no money by vile means. By heaven, I had rather coin my heart and drop my blood for drachmas than to wring from the hard hands of peasants their vile trash by any indirection. I did send to you for gold to pay my legions, which you denied me. Was that done like Cassius? Should I have answered Caius Cassius so? When Marcus Brutus grows so covetous to lock such rascal counters from his friends, be ready, gods, with all your thunderbolts, dash him to pieces." So, both having voiced their complaints, Cassius rants and raves, and Brutus basically tells him, "You're not acting honorably, your friend wasn't acting honorably, and I'm not going to take you seriously until you cool down." One source of the problem is that now Brutus is starting to see that some of the other conspirators, such as Cassius, may not have had such honorable motives as he had for killing Caesar. He's disgusted with the guy who took bribes, and he's disgusted with Cassius for wanting him pardoned. And he's especially mad that he knows Cassius as well has an itching palm. In other words, he's been known to seek after money by dishonorable means as well. Brutus says, "Remember March, the Ides of March remember. Did not great Julius bleed for justice's sake? What villain touched his body that did stab and not for justice? What, shall one of us, that struck the foremost man of all this world, but for supporting robbers, shall we now contaminate our fingers with base bribes and sell the mighty space of our large honors for so much trash as may be grasped thus? I had rather be a dog and bay the moon than such a Roman." Now Brutus's anger is more or less expected. We know that Cassius never liked Caesar, but Brutus was Caesar's friend, and the betrayal is eating away at his conscience much more than it is at Cassius's. The problem is that Brutus is an honorable man who's sort of been forced into the companionship of people who are schemers, who plot for themselves. But what surprises me is Cassius's clearly hurt feelings at what Brutus has to say. He's furious with Brutus for basically calling him a good-for-nothing scoundrel, but up until this point in the play, I don't think there's been any indication that Cassius didn't think of himself this way. We know that whereas Brutus killed Caesar for the good of Rome, for the good of his countrymen, Cassius was motivated by envy and personal gain. Julius Caesar knew this too. If we go back to near the beginning of the play, actually till the very beginning, during his triumph parade, Caesar passes by and sees Cassius and Brutus having a conversation, and he tells Mark Antony what he thinks of Cassius. He says, "Let me have men about me that are fat, sleek-headed men, and such as sleep o' nights. Yon Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Such men are dangerous. And Mark Antony at this point says, Fear him not, Caesar. He's not dangerous. He's a noble Roman and well given. But Caesar's not convinced. He continues, Would he were fatter. But I fear him not. Yet, if my name were liable to fear, I do not know the man I should avoid so soon as that spare Cassius. He reads much. He is a great observer, and he looks quite through the deeds of men. He loves no plays, as thou dost, Antony. He hears no music. Seldom he smiles, and smiles in such a sort as if he mocked himself, and scorned his spirit that could be moved to smile at anything. Such men as he be never at heart's ease, whiles they behold a greater than themselves, and therefore are they very dangerous. And Cassius gives us evidence of his own dishonesty. When he understands that Brutus won't kill Caesar for himself, but for the sake of Rome, he uses this to his advantage and forges letters that have supposedly come from anonymous citizens asking Brutus to do something about Caesar, to live up to the name of his ancestor who killed tyrants. Cassius says, Well, Brutus, thou art noble. Yet I see thy honorable metal may be wrought from that it is disposed. Therefore 'tis meet that noble minds keep ever with their likes, for who so firm that cannot be seduced? Caesar doth bear me hard, but he loves Brutus. If I were Brutus now, and he were Cassius, he should not humour me. I will this night, in several hands, in at his windows throw, as if they came from several citizens, writings, all tending to the great opinion that Rome holds of his name, wherein obscurely Caesar's ambition shall be glanced at. And after this, let Caesar seat him sure, for we will shake him, or worse days endure. He's as much as confessing right here that he's going to tempt Brutus away from the honorable path. And that's a far cry from the Cassius in Act 4, Scene 3, who says, Come, Antony, and young Octavius, come, revenge yourselves alone on Cassius, for Cassius is aweary of the world, hated by one he loves, braved by his brother, checked like a bondman, all his faults observed, set in a notebook, learned and conned by rote to cast into my teeth. Oh, I could weep my spirit from mine eyes. There is my dagger, and here my naked breast, within a heart dearer than Pluto's mine, richer than gold. If that thou beest a Roman, take it forth. I, that denied thee gold, will give my heart. Strike, as thou didst at Caesar, for I know when thou didst hate him worst, thou lovedst him better than ever thou lovedst Cassius. So what's going on here? We know that historically Brutus and Cassius are brothers-in-law, and that accounts for at least some of the love between them, even if Cassius used him for his own purposes. But even if they hadn't been brothers, we get the sense that Cassius respects Brutus, wants to be his friend, and is hurt when he thinks that Brutus thinks poorly of him. Another important thing that happens in the scene is that we see the contrast between these two opposing groups, Brutus and Cassius, and Antony, Octavius, and Lepidus. Brutus and Cassius have their quarrel, scream at each other, get all their feelings out, and make peace. They have this really touching heart-to-heart right afterwards where Brutus admits that he's out of temper because he's just gotten news that his wife Portia is dead. Now for a man like Brutus, who's a Stoic, and we'll talk a lot more about Stoic philosophy in the next video, it takes a lot to admit that accidental evils, as Cassius will call them, in other words, worldly sorrows and tribulations, can shake the disciplined mind of a man. But he admits to Cassius that Portia's death has him shaken, even though soon afterwards, when other generals join them in the tent, Brutus pretends that he doesn't know she's dead, so the generals will think they're breaking the news to him for the first time, and he is able to showcase his Stoic acceptance bordering on indifference to her death. Like I said, we'll talk more about all that in the next video. But with Cassius, Brutus has a confidant. Now compare this to the scene in the play immediately before this one, where we have Antony, Octavius, and Lepidus, the three men who have seized power and established a second triumvirate, all trying to decide who should live and who should die. Listen to the conversation between them as they're drawing up the list. Antony says, "These many, then, shall die. Their names are pricked." Octavius says, "Your brother too must die. Consent you, Lepidus?" Lepidus says, "I do consent." Octavius goes, "Prick him down, Antony." And he starts to write down the name, and Lepidus tosses in, "Upon condition Publius shall not live, who was your sister's son, Mark Antony?" And Antony says, "He shall not live. Look, with the spot I damn him." So there's not a lot of love going on between these men. They're putting down the names of people that they know are dear to the others, almost in a way to test their loyalty to the cause. Lepidus sounds almost petty, saying, "Well, you can kill my brother, but I get to kill your nephew, Antony." Then, when Lepidus leaves on an errand, Antony comes right out with it and tells Octavius that he thinks Lepidus is an idiot, no better than a horse, and that he shouldn't be sharing power with him. But that doesn't mean Octavius and Antony are buddy-buddy either. We already see them arguing in this play when the battle begins in Act 5, when they're trying to decide who's going to be leading their men where in the battle formation. Octavius is Julius Caesar's nephew and his legal heir, and he knows that Antony is trying to assert himself over him, and he doesn't like it. Now this conflict will escalate into all-out open war in another of Shakespeare's plays, Antony and Cleopatra, which can be seen as sort of a sequel to this play. In this play, we're only starting to see the beginnings of trouble brewing. So these two scenes, positioned like they are, one right after another, were to make Antony's bunch seem like a lot of self-interested schemers who distrust one another, and to make Brutus and Cassius's alliance look more like a true brotherhood, which of course makes their overthrow in the last act that much more tragic.